Hello everybody and welcome to this Lunch and Learn. The topic of the Lunch and Learn today is self-neglect. My name is Darren Lawton-Edge. I'm the named professional for safeguarding adults. So what is self-neglect? This is the Department of Health and Social Care definition which was done in 2016. A wide range of behaviour neglecting to care for one's personal hygiene, health or surroundings and includes behaviour such as hoarding. And to continue on the theme of self-neglect, this is the Social Care Institute for Excellence, who define self-neglect as a failure to seek help or access services to meet health and social care needs, inability to avoid harm as a result of self-neglect, lack of self-care to an extent that it threatens personal health and safety, neglecting to care for one's personal hygiene, health and or surroundings. So it's a definition that covers all areas. And it's always relating to a person's activities of daily living, whether that's personal care, whether it's financial care, whether it's paying bills, whether it's seeking support from adult social care, GP, district nurse. So continue on, what is self-neglect? It's a failure to seek help or access services to meet health and social care needs. It's an inability or unwillingness to manage one's personal affairs. So what are the causes of self-neglect? It could be a person who may have an acquired brain injury. They might be living with dementia, or they may have another enduring mental health condition. They may have an obsessive compulsive disorder or a hoarding disorder. They may have a physical illness which can affect their ability, energy levels, attention span, organisational skills or motivation. And also there could be a reduced motivation as a side effect of some medications, whether that's for antidepressants, whether it's psychiatric medication, whether it's pain relief. And also associated with self-neglect is addictions such as drug and alcohol. There could also be traumatic life changes in a person's life. For example, there could be a bereavement of a partner, bereavement of a child. They may have had a traumatic childhood. So if you think about children safeguarding and those adverse childhood experiences, they can follow somebody into adulthood. There are a number of causes of why people self-neglect. So how do you spot the signs of self-neglect? The person you may be supporting might be living in a very unclean, sometimes verminous circumstances. And remember, sometimes you have to think of your own, how you think someone's house should be cleaned. It's not what their expectations may be, so you need to look at that as well. Neglecting household maintenance, creating hazards in and around the property, such as electricity faults, gas faults, slip and trip and fall hazards, the cooker's been unclean, so it's really unsafe to use. It could be gas fires, it could be a number of things. It could be obsessive hoarding. People can hoard a number of things such as books, magazines, newspapers. Sometimes it may be rubbish, sometimes it may be stuff from charity shops. So there's a lot of things that people can hoard. Sometimes it's one thing, sometimes it's a collection of things. They may have poor diet and nutrition, for example, no food in the fridge. On the other side, they could have lots of food in the fridge, but it might be off and mouldy. They may be declining or refusing prescribed medication, or support to get the prescribed medication, or order the prescribed medication. They could also refuse access to property of health and social care staff. For example, they could refuse access to social workers, district nurses, domiciliary agency care staff, GP, police, as examples. Although if there is a concern about someone's mental health, they may be able to access the property by using a Section 35 warrant. Refusal to allow access to those with an interest in the property. This could be a private landlord or social landlord. If you think about a social landlord, they have more responsibilities than a private landlord, Well, they probably have the same. The property will have to have a gas safety certificate and an electricity safety certificate. So if, because gas, and if it goes wrong, there can be devastating consequences. The local authority or the social landlord can take the person to court to gain access to their property to undertake that gas safety check. They might be unwilling to attend external appointments such as clinic appointments, district nurse clinics. They may have poor personal hygiene or poor healing. They might be isolated. They could have isolated themselves from their friends and family for some reason. And there could be some substance misuse. And the person may have some increased debt. And other factors which I just mentioned, substance misuse and increased debt. And you may be able to spot the signs of those two things when you go to someone's house. It could be drug paraphernalia, alcohol bottles. In relation to increased debt, you might see more demands or final demand letters, and sometimes people get themselves into increased debt, and sometimes if they have a depressive illness, they might not open any post, so they don't know they're getting increased debt. So how do you work with someone who's self-neglecting? I think the first thing you've got to show curiosity and interest and concern about a person's welfare. We need to really concentrate on relationship building, and it's crucial in working with people with self-neglect. We have to be patient and work at their pace. Find out what the person wants and expects and what is worrying them. See if they feel able to cope or resolve some things for themselves. It's about making everything personal to that person. Put the person at the centre of everything we do. It should be although if you're doing a Care Act assessment, when we're doing a mental health work, well-being is at the centre of everything we do. So work on the well-being principle. Identify whether any risks or worries require immediate action, and what is the duration and seriousness of the self-neglect. Are there any problems, and think of it as a low, medium or high risk. Some things that might need immediate action is if you think there's a fire safety issue, if there's rats or vermin in the property, or fleas that could have a detrimental effect on that person's health. Not just on that person's health, but you've got to think the wider public issue. If they've got neighbours, they might be at risk too. To understand the history, how they came to be self-neglecting, what is their worldview? What is their life like? What's important to them? What outcome would they want from the work that you're doing with that person? Make it really person-centred and use some strength-based skills. Work on what they're strong at, and develop that further. Consider trauma. As I mentioned earlier, has there been any adverse childhood experiences that is carrying forward into their later life? Bereavement, loss, divorce. Be aware of any cultural diversity issues. At the right point, be open and honest with the person, particularly about what your worries are about them. Reinforce the positive aspects in their life. Identify the support that might be out there for them. Offer them choices, but don't make promises you can't keep, and don't overpromise. It's important that you call a case conference or a professionals meeting or team around the adult meeting early on in the process. Working with people who self-neglect is complex and tiring work, and you may need a team around the adult approach so that risk is shared around organisations. It's important to consider the Mental Capacity Act, and the law gives a very specific definition of what it means to lack capacity and for the purpose of the MCA. It's a legal test and not a medical test, and it's set down in section 2.1 of the Mental Capacity Act 2005, and in part 16 it says a person lacks capacity in relation to a matter if at the material time he is unable to make a decision for himself. In relation to the matter, because of the impairment of and the disturbance in the functioning of the mind or brain. So if we put that into 3 sections, the first one we need to think and consider in all cases before we consider the 2-stage test, so we don't use it as a tick box exercise, is think about, is the person able to make the decision, and what is the decision to be made? If they cannot, is there an impairment or disturbance in the function of the person's mind or brain? If so, is the person inability to make the decision because of the identified impairment or disturbance? And what's important is the emphasis by a Supreme Court judge in a local authorities versus JB 20. Capacity is decision specific. The statement P lacks capacity is in law meaningless. And that's really important message to put in your mind. We cannot see Mr. Anderson lacks capacity, full stop. As this judgment says, P lacking capacity, or in this case Mr. Anderson lacks capacity, is in law meaningless. To continue on regarding mental capacity assessments, as part of those the first 2 bits of the assessments, we've also got to consider, can the person understand the information given to them? Has been given to them in the right language? Do they need sign language? Do they need to be described to them? And are they able to retain the information for long enough to be able to make the decision? Can they weigh up the information available to inform that decision and communicate their decision? This could be by talking, using sign language, or even simple muscle movements such as blinking an eye or squeezing a hand. So it's really important that you consider those factors. And they all have to fail one of those areas and they would lack capacity. You may have heard of executive function, and it's about the ability to weigh up and analyse the risk. So executive function has also been described by Lord Justice Cobb as the ability to think, act and solve problems, including the function of the brain which helps us learn new information, remember and retrieve the information we've learnt in the past and use this information to solve the problems of everyday life. And I've taken that from a 39 Essex Chambers briefing. Okay, if we continue on executive function, this is unusual but not always applies to people with learning disabilities and acquired brain injury. However, learning from safeguarding adult reviews, this is not always the case. It usually relates to doing of the decision. An example of this would be, I can do my own shopping, but when you visit the person, the cupboards are empty, there's no food in, they've not been shopping. This gives us evidence they cannot execute the decision, and that's why it's important you must record everything you do. It's about understanding and weighing up the decision to be made. Another example would be, I will tidy my house as I know it is dirty. As a practitioner, you go back the next week and it's still the same. There's been no changes. It could be worse. Why is that? Think about it. Why is that? Using professional curiosity is a key when examining executive functioning. It's also to do with asking that additional question. There is some other legal routes you can take. For someone who's lacking capacity and there may be a dispute or complex case that needs to go to the Court of Protection, the most important thing here is they have to lack capacity. That's when you can take them to the Court of Protection. If a person has capacity, if you've assessed them as having capacity for the decision, then you may be thinking there may be an undue influence. They could be experiencing domestic abuse, coercive control. Then you can go to the High Court and use inherent jurisdiction. And I've put a really good video which explains inherent jurisdiction far better than I can. So if you click the link at the bottom of this page, this will take you to the Mental Capacity Law and Policy webpage, and Alex Rook-Keene, who's an expert in MCA law and policy, has a series of shedinars. I think he started these in lockdowns, so have a look at that. So a few practice points now. Everybody, including your manager, needs to understand that persistence and commitment require time. Work on shared goals, not goals based on how you think they should live. Again, it's all about what outcome does that person want. Proportionality is everything. And don't use a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Be persistent, don't give up, keep going back. As one of my old practice tutors said to me, be like Inspector Columbo, just go back and ask that additional question. But make sure all your involvement is lawful. Liaise with other professionals and, where possible, the adult's family and friends, and give a thought who else could be useful. Negotiate quick wins for the person, possibly leading to bargaining. Remember the human rights and term. You might have to consider some of the human rights legislation, the right to freedom of movement, right to a family and private life. The term self-neglect can be perceived as very stigmatizing and in an emotive term. Be careful how you use it. When you're working with someone who's maybe self-neglected or hoarding, or just as part of your general casework, it's also important to get a sense of what risks are around the house. So it may also be important to have a fire risk assessment, and especially if someone's hoarding, because you need to know if that hoarding material is fire loading, and that gives additional risk to not just the person we're looking after, but their neighbours and the wider community. There is a national clutter scale, and if you click the link at the bottom of this page, I've given you Barnsley Adult Multi-Agency Self-Neglect and Hoarding Policy and Procedure has the clutter rating scale, which is a nationally rated scale. I tried to put it on a PowerPoint, but it didn't work. So if you could take a look at that clutter rating scale. And basically what the clutter rating scale is, it's a series of questions, it's a series of pictures of like a bedroom, a living room and a kitchen, and it'll give you 3 different pictures of each of the things. So one will be slightly cluttered, one might be a bit more cluttered, and then the final part is quite uninhabitable. So take a look at that, it's a really good piece of work. And also, it's also important to try not to take pictures of the person's house, as it can be detrimental to their mental health. It also can be disempowering, embarrassing to that person. Ensure you tell the person you're doing this. You have to make sure you tell them you're going to refer them for a fire risk assessment. You may also need, in certain circumstances, to refer to environmental health. If, after the police fire risk assessment, there's concerns about the property being fire loading, which means that the fire service have got significant concerns that this could be set on fire quite quickly, or there might be vermin or rats or fleas at the property, so you might need to get environmental health involved if there's a risk to public safety, like fire loading, rats and waste, etc. Above all else, the thing I would take away from this, it's about communication with the person and with the MDT around that person, because you won't be working with it. You might be working with that person in isolation with supervision from your manager from a Pennine Care point of view, but there's also a GP involved, there's also maybe a district nurse involved, there might be a housing landlord involved, there might be ambulance service involved because there might be a frequent caller. So it's best to have a team around the adult approach. Any practitioner can call a team around the adult meeting. It brings all agents together to share all information. So every organisation will, as I like to put it, bring a piece of the jigsaw. And it's only when you've got all the pieces together you can move forward and share that risk with all organisations. It is important to include the person and the family, or consult them and tell them about there is a meeting. And they can attend the meeting if they want, but we'll be mindful of there can be an unequal balance of power at meetings, so they may think it might be a loss of control and potentially who is potentially self-neglecting. So I would think about that on a case-by-case basis and maybe do some one-to-one work prior to the meeting and post the meeting to make sure they understand what you've done. If a case is high risk, a person may have multiple complex needs and continue to make unwise decisions which may result in their serious injury or death. Ensure a Care Act assessment is completed and see if they've got care and support needs. Ensure they have some team around the adults meetings and multi-agency meetings to try and resolve the issues. If it continues to escalate, the local authority managers hold a multi-agency risk management approach. And just be careful because this is called different things in different local authorities. Like in Rochdale it's called the MRM, multi-agency risk management. In Tameside it's called the managing the risk. As a trust, we can call them and run, but the onus is not always on the local authority to call these. Check local policies, and if you're in the stage of the multi-agency risk management process, in Oldham it's called the tiered risk assessment and management protocol, where someone might be on a high risk register, which is escalated to senior manager within the local authority. A final thought, just remember, ensure that you record everything you do, and remember, if it's not recorded, it hasn't happened. I put some useful information on this slide. You've got the Oldham Safeguarding Adults Board TRAM protocol, you've got the MRM process, you've got safeguarding internal agency policies and procedures, you've got stop post violence process, 39 Essex Chambers mental capacity guidance, and Greater Manchester Fire Service home fire safety assessment. If you need to contact the Pen and Care safeguarding team, there's our contact details. We also have a web page, and all our lunch and learns get put onto the web page, so they're there for posterity, so you can go back and watch them. Or if you've got new staff on your team, you can get them to watch it. If you need to call us, our phone number is 0161 716 3785, and there's our email address, which is on screen. If you want to get the NHS Safeguarding app, if you try and take a picture of that QR code, it will come up. Failing that, go into your Google Store or Apple app and type in NHS Safeguarding app, and it'll come up. And that's everything for today. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this lunch and learn. If you've got any questions, do not hesitate to contact me. Or if you've got any ideas of any safeguarding briefings we could do in the future, drop me an email. My email address is darren.lawtonedge@nhs.net. Thank you for your time.